Undercurrent, sponsored by John Hughes in Victoria Park. Choose your station before you choose your program. Absolutely.
Hello and welcome to Undercurrent. I'm Christy Mollica. Well, this week the President of the Australian Workers' Union, Paul Howes, called on the Australian Government to take a closer look at the Charter of the Reserve Bank of Australia, and more about that throughout the show. But first up, time to take a look at all the action from the Australian Rowing Championships held recently right here in Western Australia.
Good morning and welcome to the final day of the Australian Rowing Championships, held here at Champion Lakes.
We were told 18 months ago that we had the right to conduct this event. We have had a magnificent organising group led by some really competent managers. I think that's the important aspect of managing an event of this nature. The Australian Rowing Championships is becoming a larger event every year. It's professional, it's well conducted, and the standards are getting higher. And it was a challenge to us in Western Australia to make sure that we conducted an event which met those standards.
1996, many years ago now, I dragged Jeff Gallop down here when it was just a little old deciduous lake. And we got a commitment that if Labor was elected, that we would build this Champion Lake Centre. And took us another 4 years before we were elected. But as soon as we got cracking and extended the highway, and then used that opportunity at the same time to create the lake and build this whole facility. So it was something that we saw as absolutely critical for the rowing community, but also for the people of this area. It was a great opportunity to have a world-class facility in the Armidale region.
How long have you been the President for Rowing Australia?
The last 4 years, and it's been a wonderful journey as we prepare for the London Olympic Games, and coming back here after 17 years and seeing this superb course of Champion Lakes is quite special.
Do you think that the popularity of rowing is increasing in Australia?
Yes, definitely, especially at the school level and especially schoolgirls. It is really a boom sport. The largest regatta in the Southern Hemisphere is the Head of the Schoolgirls, which is held in Victoria. So schoolgirl rowing is booming. We just would like to for them to keep on rowing, but it's booming right across the country, and also booming in masters rowing. So people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even into their 80s are rowing because they see all the advantages of continuing to row.
So that's 5 in a row for us now. Pressure's been building up each year in New South Wales. That's the first time we've won 5 since about, I think, in the possibly the 1920s.
So you're on a roll?
Yeah, so most definitely. It's an amazing feeling. There's a really good community and positive passion in the group. And it's most definitely one of the exciting races of the year for me.
And your next goal is the Olympics?
Most definitely. Olympic trials coming up in 10 days, and then hopefully from there on to the Olympic Games.
So your crew came first in the Queen's Cup. How did you feel when you went through that finishing line?
Oh, most amazing feeling ever. I remember I was absolutely terrified at the start line. I felt so sick, and then we were going through, and it was so much fun.
I was delighted to present the awards on behalf of Australia Rowing, but it was a fantastic thing for Western Australia to have this event held for the first time in 17 years in Western Australia. The last time was on the Wellington Dam at Collie, and I understand the conditions weren't the best there. This is world-class venue. Everyone from interstate who's been here has commented to me what a great venue it is. So good enough for world rowing champions. So I thought it was a marvellous event. Great credit to WA Rowing.
It has been an exciting and eventful competition, and I enjoyed presenting it.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the President of the Australian Workers Union this week has called on the Australian government to take a closer look at the interest rate cuts made by the Reserve Bank of Australia. He says that the impact of the high Australian dollar is not good for anybody in Australia and has in particular grave fears about the future of the steel industry. Well, next up on Undercurrent and on a very different tact, Lauren Bellini investigates the idea of prison privatisation here in Australia.
In Western Australia, the Barnett government has signed a $171 million contract with private multinational company Serco to run the new Young Adults Remand Centre in Murdoch. At present, the Barnett government refuses to release the details of the contract to the general public.
This is the Serco Group. They run all 7 immigration detention centres in Australia, but they do lots more. In fact, they're probably the biggest company you've never heard of. Governments all around the world outsource to Serco. Serco are also the largest air traffic controllers in the world. They've got 54 towers in the US and they control Baghdad's air traffic. They even maintain the RAF squadron the Queen flies on. All over the planet, Serco are moving people, from metros in Dubai to buses in Adelaide.
The Young Adults Facility, the first of its kind in Western Australia, will be dedicated to helping young men turn their lives away from crime by providing education, training and employment opportunities.
The British multinational is already contracted to provide services at the Fiona Stanley Hospital when it opens next year, and now is also contracted to run the neighbouring Rangeview Adolescent Remand Centre. A West Australian opinion poll in November 2011 showed 82.4% of people were unaware the new facility would be privately run.
Serco is the model of a modern multinational, and that's why they're the right company to keep us safe. They've been running the UK's ballistic missile defence system ever since it was outsourced 40 years ago. In fact, they look after Britain's entire nuclear arsenal, from creation to decommissioning. But wait, there's more. Serco are so good at running things, they even run time itself. That's right, Serco have the contract for setting Greenwich Mean Time. And Serco just keep getting bigger. Since 1994, they've grown by 1,200%. How have they been so successful? CEO Chris Hyman puts his success with Serco down to listening to God.
The selection of Serco will also provide a saving to Western Australian taxpayers.
Clearly we're concerned that the privatisation of the young offenders prison will lead to increased costs for the general public. It'll lead to a reduction in the quality of the service and will lead to greater pressures and stress upon our members. From our point of view, it's very simple. We want the public prison system to provide all of the services that are necessary for all of the prisons in WA. There is no need for this to be privatised. There is no cost-benefit analysis that we can see that shows there's any benefit to the general public.
Serco will soon be the largest operator of private prisons in the UK, and they're very efficient at it. In one prison, they increase capacity by 20% simply by putting beds in the toilets. In another Serco prison, a 14-year-old hanged himself after being assaulted by Serco guards, the UK's youngest ever death in custody.
The state government selected Serco Australia to operate the facility after an extensive evaluation determined that the private operator could bring a wealth of specific experience and innovation to the initiative.
Serco shouldn't be running, hospitals, prisons, etc., because their sole motive is profit. We see in the UK where Serco runs prisons and where they run hospitals, there's major issues. I think the youngest person to kill themselves in custody did that in a Serco prison in England. There's real concerns about the way Serco run hospitals.
Serco currently runs Acacia Prison, which the Independent Inspector of Custodial Services describes as the best run prison in the state.
The government think that because they have a contract, they can manage the service through the terms of the contract. But you can see how well that worked when we had the tragic death of Aboriginal elder Mr. Ward in the back of a van. When that occurred, that didn't lead to the service provider losing the service. They got a financial fine. It seems to me absolutely disgraceful that when somebody dies in the back of a van, that the company responsible continues to have the contract thereafter.
The Community and Public Sector Union Civil Service Association Branch Secretary Tony Walkington says West Australians do not know enough about what the 15-year contract entails.
A private company contract usually has a cost penalty if there is an incident or a breach of the contract. So of course it's in the private company's interest for that not to be publicly known and to be privately dealt with between them and the government department. We say that's a failure of privatisation, that the public have an interest in knowing what happens within prisons, and as a community, we believe the community in Western Australia cares about what happens within prisons and what's happening in its justice system.
Now, you might think things like nuclear arsenals and border protection are best handled by the government, but that's not a problem for Serco because about 85% of their workforce are ex-public servants, so they have all the training and connections necessary to handle big government contracts.
What we have is a company like Serco who are putting a huge amount of resources into lobbying the government. They're putting a huge amount of time and effort into showing that they can provide these services more cheaply so that they can line their own pockets. It seems to me that that's a corruption of the political system, and that's what we need to be worried about. When this process began, we had KPMG, one of the largest consultancy and accountancy firms in the country, providing advice to both the government and to Serco about the privatisation of the young offender facility at the same time. Now, it seems to me that is corrupt. It seems to me that that is wrong.
Serco have a very close relationship with the Liberal government. Everingham, who's a former president of the Liberal Party, is their lobbyist. They've got very close ties. They were in very early lobbying, wining and dining people. So those links go very, very deep.
Certainly Serco are an outfit that has worked very hard to secure government contracts. It has massive number of government contracts worth a lot of money.
In Australia, Serco have a presence on every military base, run every immigration detention centre, 2 prisons, cross-country trains like the Indian Pacific and the GAN, and they're bidding on more contracts right now.
It is morally and ethically wrong to put our prisons into the hands of a foreign multinational profit-making company. I'm Lauren Bellini, reporting for Undercurrent.
Serco, bringing service to life.
Well, next up on Undercurrent, Janae Tomlinson took to the streets of Perth to find out if voting in Australia wasn't compulsory, would you vote?
A South Australian man recently challenged Australia's voting laws, stating mandatory voting is undemocratic. From democracy's beginning in ancient Greek times, voting has been an important citizen right. We hit the streets of Perth to see if you think voting should remain compulsory, or if we should choose our own political involvement.
Do you think it should remain mandatory for people to vote in Australia?
Yes, it should.
Yes, it do.
Yeah, it should be. Everyone should vote. It's your voice.
Probably not. So many people throw their vote away anyway.
I think it should, yes, definitely.
I personally don't think it should, no.
Mandatory? Yes.
No, actually, I don't think you should make it mandatory. I think if people want to take an interest in politics, they should be free to choose if they want to vote or not, so yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Why is that?
Because people are basically lazy, and if they're not told they have to do it, they won't.
People are generally too slack. If you don't have it mandatory, half of them won't bother voting, and you don't get a proper answer, really.
If we didn't have such a minority vote going to the two-party preferred, probably we get a more accurate representation of the people who actually care.
Well, we're a democracy, and I think everyone has the right to vote, definitely with what the world's like today.
All the governments are as bad as each other. They're just all criminals. It doesn't matter who's in, who's out. They're all just full of lies.
I think there's a lot of people out there that believe that, oh, my vote's not going to count, it's not going to make any difference, but they all add up, man. They all make a difference. Yeah.
Do you think it's okay to fine people who don't vote?
Yes, I think it is. Again, it just goes back to basic laziness. Everyone has an opinion, but if they weren't made to vote, they wouldn't get off their butt and do anything about it.
Well, if you're going to make it mandatory for people to vote, there has to be enforcement. So, yeah, it's basically the only way to do it.
Oh, look, there's a thing in the Constitution where it says that we really don't have to vote if we don't want to. I mean, I don't begrudge people if they don't want to vote, but I think if they really care about Australia, they should vote.
I mean, with the current government we've got at the moment, I mean, I believe we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Like, there's no good sides, so maybe you might get better results, or maybe not.
Would you vote if it wasn't compulsory?
I would.
Yeah, probably.
Yes, I would.
I wouldn't, no.
Do you pay much attention to politics? Do you like have educated votes when you go in there?
I don't.
I do.
I study up the week before the election.
No, I do. I keep I have a keen interest in politics at a local level and at a federal level.
It seems most people agree. Because we are a democratic society, voting should remain mandatory, so we all get a say. I'm Janae Tomlinson, reporting for Undercurrent.
Well, every week it is my most favourite segment of the show, our Vox Pop segments. But if you would like to be involved, you can find us in the city around about lunchtimes every Tuesday. And hey, while you're here, why not stop for a spot of gelato? I'm Christy Mollica, more Undercurrent after the break.
Undercurrent, sponsored by John Hughes in Victoria Park. Choose your station before you choose your program. Absolutely.